Have you ever thought your new home was the safest place on earth? That behind that locked door, there would be nothing but peace and laughter? But sometimes a new house isn't just a place to start over. It's where old secrets were never truly buried. Tonight, I'll tell you 3 real stories about people who moved into their new homes, only to realize they weren't alone. Are you ready? Just make sure to take one last look around your house before you turn off the lights. Chao Chu Yen Wan Nung Buk Tuong Soai Lung. This happened a couple of years ago when my wife and I moved our growing family out of the city and into a small home in the suburbs. With 3 young kids, toys everywhere, and a baby that cried half the night, our tiny apartment had started to feel like a pressure cooker. So when we found a house in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place neighbors bragged about leaving doors unlocked, we didn't hesitate. The house wasn't big, but it had a decent-sized yard, and more importantly, it felt like a fresh start. My wife immediately fell in love with the backyard, a slightly overgrown garden framed by cracked stepping stones, and a handful of stone statues that looked like they'd been there for decades. Angels, maidens, figures draped in robes worn by time and streaked with moss. They had a gothic, almost sacred vibe, like something you'd see in the ruins of an old cathedral. I thought they were a little creepy, but my wife said they gave the garden character. I didn't care enough to argue, so we left them just as they were. A few days after we moved in, I was sipping coffee by the kitchen window, admiring the yard, when something caught my eye. One of the statues, an angel, was facing away from the house. All the others were turned toward us. I could have sworn they were all facing the same direction before. I chalked it up to memory and moved on. But the next morning, another statue had turned around. This time I was certain. I called my wife over, but she just laughed and told me I must be imagining things. I even asked my son, he's a bit of a prankster, but the blank look on his face told me it wasn't him. I started watching the statues every day, noting their positions. For a few days, nothing changed. Then one evening, just before sunset, I glanced out the window and felt my heart lurch. All 5 statues had moved. They were now standing in a perfect line along the back edge of the house, too close. And they weren't just facing away. Their postures had changed. One had its head bowed, another had its hands raised like in prayer. A third had something in its hand, a rock, maybe, I don't know. But I swear for a moment I felt like they were looking at me. Watching. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. It was still light out, but the yard felt cold quiet, in a way that made your ears ring. I walked up to the nearest statue and tried to move it. Nothing. It didn't budge. They were heavy, impossibly heavy. Not the kind of thing a single person could shift in the night without help or machinery. I called the police. They sent someone over, took a report, told us it was probably kids pulling a prank. But even the officer couldn't lift one of the statues. He suggested we install cameras. We told him we would, but truthfully, money was tight, and I hated the idea of turning our new peaceful home into a fortress. A few nights later, I woke up to a sound, something soft like dirt being moved. I looked out the window. Nothing. But the next morning, there was a small hole in the yard. Fresh dirt. Right where the statues had stood. I filled it in. Pretended it meant nothing. I wanted so badly to believe it was over. Then came the weekend. I was outside playing with my kids when I noticed something written on the back wall of the house in thick, jagged letters carved deep into the siding. Go away. I rushed my kids inside. My wife was pale when she saw it. That night we didn't sleep. And then, they came. Just past midnight, 5 figures stood in the garden. They wore cracked angel masks identical to the statues and danced. Not gracefully, but with jerky, twitching movements like puppets yanked by invisible strings. We watched from the window, frozen. I don't know how long it lasted, but eventually I grabbed the kitchen knife and ran outside screaming. They didn't run. They turned, and one by one stepped backward into the same hole I had filled days earlier, as if the earth had swallowed them. We installed cameras the next morning. No one came back, but the statues still stand in the yard, and every few weeks one of them turns just slightly. A hand raised, a head tilted, a new crack in the stone, like they're waking up. Kayu Chuyen 2, Fong Tho Duoi Tang Ham. My wife Taylor and I had been living in our new place in New Mexico for just under 3 months when things started to feel off. The house was a steel, big, isolated, surrounded by open country. Just the two of us and our dog Lola. It should have felt peaceful, but then the lights upstairs started flickering. Being an electrician, I figured it was a simple issue with the breaker. I hadn't really spent much time in the basement since we moved in, so I grabbed my flashlight and headed down. The basement was cluttered with old furniture the previous owners had left behind. Musty air, boxes of who knows what. I found the main panel tucked in a corner and got to work. But as I turned to leave, something caught my eye. Behind a pile of wooden chairs was a large metal door. Not just any door, it looked industrial. Steel reinforced, taller than standard, with heavy hinges and a lock that didn't belong in a house. It reminded me of a walk-in safe or a panic room. I tried the handle. Locked. I went upstairs, found the bundle of old keys the owners had left us. None of them fit. I eventually called them. The man barely spoke. It was the wife who finally answered my questions. She said it was just an old storm room. I told her it was locked, and after a long pause, she told me they'd lost the key. She said we should just ignore it. Her tone said more than her words did. Something was wrong. I couldn't let it go. A week later, I hired a locksmith. He worked on the door for over an hour, muttering to himself about the complexity of the mechanism. When he finally cracked it, I almost wished he hadn't. Inside was a small room. No windows, just a single light dangling from the ceiling. The walls were lined with black and white photographs covered in strange symbols that looked carved or burned into the frames. In the center, a chair facing a blank wall, worn down, like someone had sat there for days on end. There was a cot in the corner, crumpled blankets. The air smelled stale, sour. And then I saw the trash, empty water bottles, snack wrappers, crumpled tissues. Someone had been living in there, and not long ago. My skin crawled. I stepped further in and noticed a second door, small, hidden in shadow. I opened it and found a narrow stairwell leading up to the cellar door on the outside of the house. It opened easily. From the outside, it looked like just another locked hatch, but from inside, it had always been accessible. Someone had been coming and going. I ran up and barricaded the cellar door with heavy furniture, padlocked it shut from the inside. That night I didn't sleep. And then around 3 a.m., we heard the bang at the front door. Lola barked like she'd seen the devil. Rocks started tapping against our bedroom window. My wife was trembling. I grabbed the bat from under our bed and yanked the curtain aside, but I saw nothing. Just silence. Until glass shattered downstairs. I ran to the kitchen in time to see 2 shadowy figures sprinting into the dark. The window was broken. In the garden where they'd stood was a pile of dirt, and on top of it a crude scarecrow, dressed in one of my old hoodies. The police came, took a report. They couldn't find anyone. Said it was probably squatters. Maybe the previous owners knew, maybe they didn't. But they left that door locked for a reason. And I still don't know what's more terrifying, the thought that someone lived under us for weeks without us knowing, or that they might come back. Ku Chuyan 3. Ngoi Punu Fia Sao Hang Rao. When I bought my first house, I was 27. It wasn't much a two-bedroom on a quiet street, but it was mine. I'd spent my whole life living with family surrounded by noise, and for the first time I was truly alone. I quickly got into a routine. I'd sit out on my tiny balcony at night, smoke a cigarette, and unwind. From up there, I could see over the 10-foot fence into my backyard neighbor's property. That's how I noticed her. She never waved, never mowed the lawn, never even turned on a porch light. The house looked abandoned, but some nights I'd see a faint light in the upstairs bedroom. Just a flicker. I assumed she was just a reclusive old woman. One Saturday, I walked around the block and knocked on her front door, just trying to be neighborly. The yard was wild. Paint-peeling steps cracked. I knocked again, and just when I was about to leave, the door slammed open. She stood there short, hunched, with wide, glassy eyes and gray hair pulled tight. Her face didn't move. She just stared, not blinking, not speaking. I introduced myself. She said her name was Priscilla, and nothing else. That night I went out to the balcony as usual. She was in the yard, standing still, staring straight up at me. She didn't move. I went back inside. The next night she was there again, this time in the window. The night after, in another. She watched me from different parts of her house, never blinking, never looking away. I told myself she was lonely, harmless. Then one morning I found something in my yard, a woman's sock, dirty and crumpled. Later that week, a comb with strands of long gray hair. That fence had no gaps. She'd been in my yard. Then came the night she rang my doorbell over and over. I knew it was her. I should have called the cops, but I was exhausted, annoyed. I opened the door. She lunged, screaming, her face twisted in rage, a knife in her hand. She screamed that I took her son. I managed to wrestle the blade away, pin her to the floor, and call the police. She was still screaming when they dragged her away. Later, I found out her son had died years ago, in that same house. No one told me. I moved out 6 months later. But before I left on my last night there, I looked out at her house one final time. There was a light in the upstairs bedroom, and a shadow standing still behind the curtain, watching. New homes are often seen as places for a fresh start, but as you've just heard, not every beginning is a peaceful one. Some doors are meant to stay closed forever. Some eyes behind the fence were never meant to meet yours. And sometimes the scariest thing is realizing you're no longer the true owner of your own home. Thank you for listening. If you've ever experienced something strange in the place you live, don't hesitate to share. And don't forget, always check behind the curtains before you go to sleep.